This is Kim Hammer, pastor of Saline Baptist Church in the community of Tull outside Benton, with your devotion taken from the book of Deuteronomy chapter 15 verses 12 through 18. In order for us to get an understanding of these verses, we need to go back and look at the subject matter previous to these verses, and that was where God was instructing the nation of Israel as to how they were to treat those that were among them that were poor and in poverty. And in verses 12 through 18, we find the reality of life as it existed back then was that sometimes people were so poor and so much in poverty that they had no choice but to sell themselves into slavery in order to be able to have the basic needs of life met. And so God took the matter into his own hands, and he established the guidelines that in that unfortunate situation, how the Hebrews were to treat their fellow Hebrew brothers who had had to sell themselves into slavery. We find that God established this in order to make sure that there was no injustice and that there was no opportunity for individuals to take advantage of other individuals. We find that that God also built into it a 7-year opportunity for slaves to come out from underneath their owners if that's what they chose to do. So God wanted to make sure that there was a stopgap to where it would not be indefinite, but that those who had gone into slavery would have a chance at freedom. And he used the example of how that the Israelites had all been in slavery at one time as a nation for 400 years to Egypt. And he also reminded them that as he had shown mercy upon them to set them free, he expected the Hebrews to treat their fellow Hebrews who were in that situation with the same attitude that God did for them whenever he delivered them from Egypt. He even went so far as to tell them that at the end of 7 years, if the slave chose to go about and enjoy their freedom, that the owner was commanded to give to the slave ample amount of provisions from the blessings that they had received by them being a slave to them for 7 years, so that that slave would have an opportunity to start new in their freedom without repeating the cycle of poverty. And that's exactly what God did with the nation of Israel when he set them free from Egypt. He gave them the resources as the Egyptians gave gifts to the Israelites, so that when they went off to their nation or to their opportunity of freedom, they were able to break the cycle of poverty because they had the provisions that they needed. We find also that God instructed the Israelites to the environment that they were supposed to create in the relationship between the owner and the slave, because sometimes we find that the slaves fell in love with the family who was owning them, and by the same token, those who were in the ownership position treated the slaves more as family than they did as slaves. And that's an example of God's love, and also sets the tone that God does not want us to take advantage of those that find themselves in less fortunate situations, but instead he wants us to create an environment of God's love, so it's not an owner to slave relationship, but instead it is an example of God's working to the greatest capability. And so we find that people should be treated right in order to receive the blessings. And that's what God was telling the owners of the slaves, that if they did not treat them right, God would withhold that blessing. But if they did what God told them they were supposed to do, that God would not only bless the slave, but he would also bless the owner. And as a result, in an unfortunate situation, God would get the glory and the praise. Every day of our life, we find people in less fortunate situations than we are. We should not seek to take advantage of them, but instead we should use it as an opportunity to promote God's love so that he gets the glory and he gets the praise. Hope you have a great day.